Okay, well, we may as well start. We've got a few people still joining, but that's okay. We don't want to let time get away from us for too much longer. So I'd like to welcome everybody to our first LGFP online webinar. We're hoping to run a series of these. This was obviously our first attempt, so please bear with us. We have done a test run, so hopefully there won't be any technical glitches. However, if there is, bear with us. If your connection drops out, I believe we are recording it, so we'll be able to make the video available at a later date for those that may miss out. If you do have questions, we can take questions as we go. There's a question and answer button towards the bottom, should be on the bottom of your screen. If you type in your question there, at the end of each section within the QAO presentation, we'll try and answer those questions. And if we run out of time or they need a more technical answer, we'll endeavour to follow that up and distribute those at a later date. So today we've got Queensland Audit Office have kindly volunteered to be our first off the ranks. Obviously by popular demand, our survey did indicate that people did want to hear from the QAO, so we're bringing them to you, and I will hand over to Pat, who will start the QAO presentation, and we hope that it all goes well. Thank you, Pat.
Thanks, Tony. And look, it's great to be part of the first LGFP webinar. We do hope it goes well, and hopefully everyone gets some value out of our presentations today. I've got a few people with me, as you can probably see in the room. I've got Rob Kilbride, who some would remember from from the conference last year, where he gave a presentation with me around data, and he'll give us some more updates on that this year. And David Tomer. And David, some of you will be familiar with. David's going to talk to us about some cybersecurity work that we've done, and also managing some ICT projects, which are obviously very topical issues at the moment as well. Look, we're happy to take questions. Please send them throughout the presentation. We won't answer them during our sessions. We'll save them to the end of the sessions or to the end of the whole presentation. We've saved a fair bit of time for that. So as always, happy to take questions on anything, and we'll see how we go with answering those. Now, Damon Olive, who is in the other screen there. So Damon and I are sort of transitioning in and out of positions. Some of you would be familiar with that. So obviously I was leading local government for a while. I've now moved into the Parliamentary Services team, and Damon's now the Assistant Auditor General for local government and regions. Ideally, we would have been travelling around meeting lots of you. We did have that opportunity at Tropical earlier in the year, but obviously it's been a pretty interesting year. And so unfortunately we haven't been out and about and meeting as many of you as possible. But I guess that's the rundown. But what a year it's been so far. I don't think anyone would have predicted this at Christmas time, or even early into the new year. We've come up with lots of new words around self-isolation and social distancing. I think all of us have been on webinars and video conferences and Teams meetings. We certainly know a lot more about people's pets and families and dogs and all sorts of things, and the challenges that those sort of things present. We had intended for this presentation for Damon and I both to be speaking, but as is the world these days, Damon has a number of large concrete trucks in the background of his where he is at the moment. So we have to be adaptable in this world, and so we'll work with what we've got today. So I guess a lot of us have put a lot of things on hold this year. We had a lot of plans, we had a lot of things that we wanted to achieve, and we've had to put a pause on some things. But we haven't been able to put a pause, and we shouldn't have put a pause on the services that local government are delivering to their communities. Communities still need those things. So while some things in life have stopped, other things have had to continue on. And that's been an important part of our communities getting through this. There's been lots of different relief measures issued by both state and your own councils and the federal governments. And so there's a lot of information around at the moment, and lots of things happening really quickly that are impacting finance professionals. And so service delivery still goes on, financial reporting still goes on, and it's really important that we're know what's happening, are up to date with what's happening in our various communities as well, because that's going to be really important for getting through this reporting season and ultimately at least the next few to go as well. So we recognise that it's been a very difficult time, and as QAO we sort of sat back to see, well, how could we help our clients through this period? And one of the things that we've been doing is issuing a series of COVID-related blogs on our website. So hopefully many of you have subscribed, hopefully you've read them, and hopefully you found them useful. We've talked about things like internal controls and how they vary in the world, where you have some people working at work, some people working at home. All the office working at home. When you used to have a process that someone signed a manual form, well, how does that happen in a virtual world? You know, what about electronic record keeping and approvals? So we've sort of released a lot of guidance of those sort of topics. Also on property, plant and equipment valuations. So in a world where valuers can't come to communities to value assets, how do you navigate through that world? So we've certainly put a lot of information out around some of those topics, and we hope you found them useful. Nothing is insurmountable. Whilst it's been a difficult year, no problem is insurmountable. So in the property, plant and equipment blog, for example, we give councils a number of tips as to how they can get through property, plant and equipment valuations this year if you weren't able to go and have physical inspections of buildings, so or various assets. So there are ways around it. So please, make sure you've considered those. If that's, well, I'll say hopefully everyone's done their valuations and they're all booked and audited by now, and it's not even an issue. But if there are a couple that are still struggling, please have a read of that. I'll touch on a couple of the other themes as we go through as well. A little while back, obviously, those that went to the Tropical workshops will be familiar with Carmen Ridley, who helped prepare Tropical for the department this year and came and gave some presentations with our own David Hardage around the technical accounting aspects for the current year. Carmen also gave an update session a few weeks ago around financial reporting and the impacts of COVID-19. So hopefully most of you attended that. If not, I think the department probably still has some slides that they might be able to share if you're able to get in touch with them or through the local government finance professionals. There are lots of things to consider this year, particularly things that probably have posted under the radar in previous years. Things like judgments and estimates, things like impairment of receivables. All of these things come into play when you look at your communities and there's growing unemployment, or there's businesses shut down. Yourselves that you're putting out various relief packages for your community, and you know how your community is travelling. But what does that mean for some of the numbers that you're reporting in your financial statements? So you need to consider all of those things. I mentioned property, plant and equipment before. Commitments and guarantees, are there any of those sort of things that you're putting out there? Are you committing to things, contingent liabilities? Like, what risks are you taking on because of the circumstances that you're in at the moment? Post-balance date events. I'm sure most of you would know that every year you just write there's no material subsequent events in your financial statements and we all move on. This year, there is no doubt that your auditors will be asking more questions about that. Saying there's nothing to see here is probably not the right answer. It's actually looking through, because I think there's probably a lot of things that have happened post-year end. Many of you have tabled your budgets post-year end where relief measures have been formalised. Those are the sort of things that you need to consider about disclosing in your financial statements. Equally, as we all know, the world changes every 5 minutes these days. So there is potentially things that will happen between now and when you sign your financial statements, now and when you table your annual reports. And if those things are material, then we need to think about whether they need to be in the financial statements and how you need to disclose them in the financial statements. So that's really important. And there will need to be...
Sorry, Pat, I was just going to say there, I mean, it's probably worth everyone being aware of what happened in the university sector earlier this year. So the financial reports for the universities were all certified within the time frame of 28 Feb, but before those annual reports were tabled, COVID did hit, and that had a substantial impact for universities and resulted in, an audit opinion being reissued for one of those. So it is something that would be followed right up until tabling of council annual reports this year as well. So
the earlier you table your annual report, the better. Sign your financials, get that annual report done straight away. Don't take the month you're allowed. The earlier you get it out, everyone can relax a little. Really important that this year you will need to have a note in your financial statements around the COVID-19 and the impacts. Even if you don't believe your council has been significantly impacted, readers are expecting to see something in there around the impacts for you. So really important that that's there. And let's not forget, we also have a couple of new accounting standards this year that I'm sure you've all dealt with. Again, one of the reasons that we all tried to put the new standards to bed early is so that you're well prepared and can deal with these last minute changes like we've been thrown this year. I sort of mentioned the auditors asking questions about subsequent events, which is absolutely true. One of the things your auditors will be asking for this year is some information around your future cash projections. It's around going concern, it's around financial sustainability, it's around those subsequent events. So it's not that a council is necessarily going to fold and not be a going concern. One of your controlled entities could be. That's a really important decision for them and your oversight of them. But for councils, it's about that long-term, well, that short-term, medium-term and long-term sustainability. And so some of the decisions you're making now around relief measures need to be factored into your cash flows going forward, so you have a true understanding of what position you're going to be in, what funds you need to borrow, what funding is available to you, and the auditor needs to see some of those things to see what risks exist. So expect that your auditors will be asking for that information. I think that's a given this year. Please be prepared for it. Please make sure you've thought about what your future cash projections are from August through to December next year. All of those sort of things, at least 12 months in advance. So what are your predictions? You know that people are either probably slower in paying the rates or not paying them. You know that there might be more or less grants available. Factor these things in, what kind of relief measures you have, and please do that modelling, because that's going to be really important and something we're asking for. Equally, we'll be looking for some management representations on some of these things as well. So we'll be asking you to put hand on heart and sign off on some of these things around COVID and going concern. And controlled entities, I sort of touched on briefly. Many controlled entities operate in spaces like arts and culture and sport that have been significantly impacted, maybe just for that 3-month period or maybe much longer when people can't go and congregate in the numbers that they used to. So I'm sure you're aware of what your controlled entities are doing, but it's really important in these circumstances where obviously a council has control of these entities. You need to be getting reports through that actually tell you what state these entities are in, what decisions they're making, and it's too late after a problem happens. So you need to be well informed and then be able to make appropriate decisions about what you do with controlled entities, how you help them, what your strategies are going forward. So, and you can give that information to your councillors to make that decision. Obviously, I mentioned cash management. That's obviously king in times of crisis, managing your cash flows. Can you pay your bills when they come due? And so that was a focus of one of our blogs. We specifically called out cash management in local governments. Obviously, there's a broad spectrum of councils. There's the bigger ones that have lots of staff, and obviously there's smaller ones that these things become really critical too for all entities. So please make sure you're across that. If you haven't read that, please go and do so. Really important too when you've got new councils coming in. Not sure what the background of some of your councillors are, and so presented with a new business, they need to get the facts on how some of these things are working and make informed decisions about going forward. Because as I've mentioned a few times, the world is changing rapidly. So knowing what relief measures will do to your forward estimates is really important, and modelling those things out. This isn't just for an audit purpose. This is actually to help you run your business better and help your executives and your councils actually deliver on what they need to do. One of the points there is around revisit timing of capital projects. So there's no doubt that the state and federal governments will throw money at infrastructure and try and get the economy going that way. Really important that you've got solid asset management plans that sit behind your business, so you know what are the best projects that are going to get the most value for your community. Where can you use this money when it's thrown at you? Where can you use it most effectively to improve the lives of your constituents in your community? So really important with that one as well. And the last point there, please keep telling us, auditors, management and audit committees, keep them informed of what your various relief measures are, what your projects are. It's only with that information can people make informed decisions about the way forward. And I do mention audit committees. Obviously, with the change of council, it wasn't just COVID. We did go through an election. We can't forget that. So it obviously brings change to most of your communities. So with that, obviously might bring some forced changes or might bring some planned changes to your audit committee, particularly if councillors on the committee have changed. We know a number of committees turn over around about this time. So again, we've been talking about audit committees for a while. We certainly encourage all councillors to have them. And we certainly encourage all councillors to get the right members on them to make them effective. Just having them doesn't mean they're worthwhile. Actually getting the right people on there to help challenge the business, challenge your leaders, and actually that's the way that audit committees can be effective. So we give some tips in a recent blog there around getting the right mix of skills. How do you get the right councillors with the right skills? Again, if COVID's taught us anything, one of the things I heard a lot previously, we don't have any people in the local area that have the right skills, so we don't want an audit committee. If COVID's taught us anything, you don't need to be in the local area. It's about getting the right people. Technology these days allows all sorts of meetings and Teams meetings, webinars, whatever it is, that can be really successful. So get the right people, and hopefully that will drive the right outcomes in your business. So one of the key blogs I haven't talked about was sort of one focused on internal controls and also around cyber security. And cyber security has been a heightened risk during this period. And I might just pass over to David to talk us through cyber security.
Excellent. Thank you, Pat. He's a cyber security expert. Can't use a mouse.
Everything works well till we change over. Sorry about that.
Excellent. Thank you, Pat. So I'm going to talk about our cyber security report, which we tabled in Parliament last October. It was very topical at that point. I think it's even more topical now, given what's happened during this COVID-19 period. I'm sure you've noticed media coverage about state-based attacks against Australian government interests, which concerns us all, but we should also keep in mind the increased risks we're all exposed to because of the new way that we're working. So in the past, we may have gone into our corporate office environment and connected to our corporate networks using a trusted connection. And now in this new world, we're taking that connection into what's effectively an untrusted connection, connecting from our homes. And that certainly increases some of our risk exposure. So we have to be really vigilant around this. And certainly one of the lessons around cybersecurity, it's not all about the technical controls. It's also about our attitudes. It's about our own personal vigilance in terms of the type of passwords we use, in how we protect the information that is entrusted to us. So in this particular audit, we selected three entities, and we essentially conducted a hacking exercise in those three entities. So we engaged experts, and with those entities' consent, conducted an exercise over a period of about 3 months to demonstrate what could we learn by compromising those environments. We were successful in all three occasions. And what we did is we set targets for our ethical hackers, if we want to call them that. So we selected targets in each of those entities. Now, the definition of success in this exercise for us was not simply breaking into the network. The definition of success was being able to demonstrate that we could compromise information assets, or another term I like to use is to get access to the crown jewels. And in doing that exercise, what we wanted to do was to understand, well, what are the things that made it easy for our consultants to do that work, to get access to those crown jewels? And that's what we published in our report, the things which made it easy for our consultants to get into those networks. Now, one of the frameworks that we use to do this audit is what's called the Essential 8. Now, the Essential 8 is published by the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. And effectively, if there's one thing we need to do around cybersecurity, it's to implement these Essential 8 measures, because by implementing those Essential 8 measures, they give us a better chance of making it more difficult for attackers to compromise our systems. And so the things you see here on the slide, and which is described in more detail in our report, describe in further detail what were the things which made it easy for our team to get access to the information assets that we set in the targets. So some of the lessons around this certainly was around physical security. So in one of these instances, what our team was able to do was to obtain physical access into an entity by tailgating staff, and by tailgating staff and being able to walk past the reception desk, and then finding a desk or finding a room, and then connecting their devices, and then by connecting those devices, being able to intercept passwords and use some of their sophisticated tools. That initial lapse in vigilance at the security door is what enabled our team to get access to that internal network, that it then enabled them to launch further attacks to get access to those more sensitive systems. And so it all started by a breach in physical security. Now, the comforting thing for this entity was that it was quite difficult for our attackers to get access from the outside, from the cyber world. The initial access was through a breach in physical security, but what that exposed is that at that particular entity, they were a bit soft at the core. So once we were able to break through that perimeter, we were able to expose further weaknesses in that environment. And so that really alerts us to the importance of testing physical security. So when we're conducting tests around cybersecurity, we should also consider testing our physical security controls, because that is what could actually provide people with the front door access into our systems. Poor passwords was another key lesson from this. So our consultants were able to crack about 6,000 passwords at one entity, and they were able to do that in about 3 minutes. At another entity that we audited, they were able to get access to 800 user accounts and crack those passwords again in about 3 minutes. Now, the reason they were able to do this so quickly was because of the type of passwords that many users were using. So you'll see in our report, we actually disclose some of the passwords that we found, and they're the base passwords. So passwords like password. It could have been password 123, but at the end of the day, it still had the word password in it. Sometimes there were different permutations on the word password. Sometimes instead of the 2 S's in password, it would have 2 5s. Or sometimes we had a password like new user or welcome, or maybe even the name of a service that the public sector entity was using. And so by having these simple passwords, it just made it far too easy for our consultants to do the work that they did in exposing the clear text passwords for such a large volume of user accounts. And what we also asked our consultants to do was to go into the deep and dark web and to see, well, what other passwords about these users have already been disclosed in the deep and dark web. And so what we found is about 500 user accounts associated with these 3 entities, where their user's email address and associated password was disclosed on publicly available lists. Now, this doesn't mean that the passwords associated with the corporate accounts were leaked. What it means is that the users were using their corporate ID on a non-corporate system. And so they may have used it on like an Adobe account, a LinkedIn account, MySpace, whatever other social service they may have been using. And those services have known password breaches. The risk is if our users, and we all know we do this from time to time, reuse their passwords across systems, then that provides an attacker with quite an easy avenue to launch an attack when they see a corporate ID email address that's got a leaked password. That gives them an opportunity to try and attempt that on a corporate network. Multi-factor authentication was another important element that we noticed here, where we often think of multi-factor authentication in terms of giving us external access into an environment, but we also need to think about it in terms of protecting internal assets as well. So once our attackers were able to penetrate into the network and gain initial access, they were able then to jump into other more sensitive parts of the network because they weren't prompted for that second level of authentication before they continue to progress. Another key lesson that is worth pointing out here is in regards to outdated systems with known vulnerabilities. So we found instances of entities using environments like Windows XP or old versions of Windows Server. The issue with that is that those environments are known to not be supported by the vendor over a long period of time. So Windows XP and older versions of Windows Server haven't had patches deployed by Microsoft for over 5 years now. And so the hacking community knows that there are vulnerabilities associated with those outdated systems. So that provides hackers with a potential target. So our report to Parliament provides 17 recommendations for all entities to consider. And what we've suggested entities do is to really begin with those first 3 recommendations, which really sets the framework on what an entity should really be focusing on in implementing cybersecurity strategies. So it's about making sure we've got a framework for managing cybersecurity risks, knowing what are the information assets that we have that we know we need to protect, and what is the extent that those assets are exposed. Now, in doing risk assessments around cybersecurity, one of the observations we made is entities doing a very general risk assessment. Like, for example, a risk might be that we could be hacked. But what we wanted to see was a more specific granular risk assessment where an entity would identify that there's a risk associated with a specific information asset that they are seeking to protect. And so doing that is really important to ensure that we're applying the right level of controls around those assets. So moving on now to ICT projects. So earlier this year, we tabled a report into a review we did into the Spur ICT project being run out of Queensland Treasury. It was a project that was cancelled. It didn't deliver on the outcome that the government was expecting. And we were called in. We were given a referral by the former Under Treasurer to investigate what were the governance issues and what are the learnings for all ICT projects so that we could prevent these type of projects failing in the future. And certainly there are a number of lessons. And if you have a look in our report to Parliament, there's about a page or 2 where we publish some of the key lessons around about 11 key lessons that we published. But when I sit back and look at all these key lessons, it really boils down to one key issue, and that is mistakes being made during planning of a project. If we don't get the planning right, we really pay for it later on in the delivery of the project. And that's really the key message I want to leave you with here, because what we noticed in this particular project is by not setting things up properly during the planning phase, issues started to emerge later on that potentially could have been prevented. So for example, the state entered into a contract with the vendor to deliver this major ICT system. But before we entered into that contract with the vendor, we hadn't actually done, as a state, due diligence over the vendor's product. We hadn't, for example, done any trips overseas or do any virtual meetings with public sector entities overseas to understand how they were using the system in their environments. And so we've entered into a contract without doing adequate due diligence around the product and knowing whether the product can actually do what we want it to do. And so those sort of issues happening during planning then create issues later down the track. Because then during project delivery, we find the product isn't actually meeting our needs. One of the reasons for that is because 15 months after we sign the contract, we are doing a detailed requirement specification exercise. And so we then end up in a situation where the vendor's not giving us what we expected to deliver. We then enter into an arrangement to try and sort out what is it that we expect them to deliver, which then results in a lot of change requests. So in this particular project, the state and the vendor exchanged over 300 change requests. They did major variations to the contract on 3 occasions. And so all of this really stems from entering into an arrangement originally without doing that proper due diligence and planning. So for example, the state entered into this contract with an expectation that this was going to be a software configuration exercise, that we would take the vendor's product, that we would configure it to meet our needs. However, because we didn't do that due diligence around the product, we then realized the product would actually require significant customization. And so moving from what we expected to be a configuration exercise to a customization exercise really introduced significant risk into the project, and ultimately the state made the decision to terminate the contract with the vendor, which meant after all the public money that was spent on this, we didn't end up with a system that was fit for purpose to address the business need that we had at the beginning of the project. Another key message I'll leave you with is in regards to the importance of really strong project steering committees. So 2 issues here: making sure that people on project steering committees have both the capability and the capacity to be involved in the project. So when we don't have the right capability in individuals in the project steering committee, that can then result in an over-reliance on consultants and contractors. That can then result in not really understanding what the business needs from the software solution. The other issue there is in relation to capacity. If the members of our project steering committees don't have sufficient capacity to be involved in the project and be prepared, then that can really limit their ability to be well informed in making key decisions and in managing risks in project delivery. I'll now hand over to Robert.
Yeah, we've got a question. Do we want to answer that now? So it just relates to audit committees. So I can see a question there from Michael where it's basically referencing, and this is what I think one's Pat or Damon, knowing that there is, it can be difficult to get a good, set of, access to some skills and resources when it comes to audit committees. How do we actually think that local government audit committees are actually faring at the moment performance-wise, and how they're actually tracking?
Interestingly, I probably should have mentioned this, we're doing an audit on the effectiveness of audit committees at the state government level at the moment, and we will be tabling that report in early September. So there'll be some things in there that will be useful for councils. Look, I think the quality of local government audit committees varies quite a lot. There are some really excellent committees out there that have the right members that challenge, the direction of internal audit, our external audit findings. They challenge management and actually make the business a better business, and that's the value that the audit committee should be bringing. So I think there are some excellent ones there. I think there are some excellent audit committees in local government that are far better than some of the ones I see in state government. However, there's also some that have not yet grasped the value that they can get from an audit committee. So there's some that probably don't have the right members. There's some that then go through the motions of being a committee without understanding what they should be bringing to the table. that's not just the committee's fault. I think that's some leadership within the council that don't quite understand how the audit committee can be beneficial, both to the councils and to the executive. So I think it's certainly a bit too paced within local government and the way audit committees are run. But there are some excellent ones at some councils that others can learn from. And I know some of the larger councils have offered that opportunity to some of the smaller councils where they can sit in on an audit committee meeting and understand how that's run. And so that has been, I've been in some of those audit committees where that offer's been taken up. So if you're out there, that's probably a good way to go.
Cool. And just a follow-up question from Dol. Is audit committee mandatory for Indigenous councils? Question mark. Referencing Sherwood Council as an example.
It's not at the moment. So the local government legislation has some limits based on the size of the council. We've been recommending to the department for a number of years that they revisit that because we think it should be mandatory for all councils as it is in some of the other states. So we've certainly made that recommendation. We would certainly encourage you to do it because we think there's value in it, but at the moment it's not mandatory.
Cool. Awesome. So what we'll do is I'm going to give a bit of an overview now of the data strategy, which is we've heard some really important information today. I like to think that I'm talking about the kind of coolest topic on the agenda. So, and one that I'm very passionate about. So I'll go through this in about 10 minutes and then we'll definitely have some more time for some more questions at the end that anyone should have on any of the topics that either David, myself or Pat have discussed. So just jumping into the data strategy. So what I want to do today is give you a little insight into, why we've got a data strategy and what we're trying to achieve, followed by how we're evolving that data strategy. So some of you have known or had exposure to us, requesting data or showing you some of the analytics we've done in the past. This is to show, I want to give you a little insight into how we're evolving that. We just don't rest on our laurels. Through to data governance, which is really the foundation of everything we try to achieve, which really lends itself to what David was talking about, and really that importance that we place on the data we receive from any of our entities, whether it be in local government or state-based entities, GOCs or anything, okay? We really do take data seriously and our responsibilities for it while it's in our possession. And then finally, some insight into next steps, because what we're looking to do at the moment is really expand our data strategy to a lot of local government entities. But in those previous slides, I'm really trying to give you that context so that when we get to the next steps, it kind of just makes sense that we're going in this direction. So first of all, I just thought I'd start off with the kind of, we've got a big focus, one of our bylines is better public services, right? So we don't just go out to entities and, a lot of what you've heard so far is us going to the entity, to you guys and providing guidance and advice about how we think, some of your organisations, areas you could benefit from. A lot of our data strategy is really focused on how we can be better auditors, okay? And this little diagram here kind of shows some of those focus areas for us on why we think data strategy is really important. Evolution. So while audit's been around for a long time, we know that with the availability of new technology, the access to techniques that were previously, mathematical analytical techniques that were previously a little harder to access are now more accessible with advances in technology and also the volumes of data. So we know this is an awesome opportunity to evolve how we audit. More importantly too, integration. So we've got a lot of different areas that we audit now. So we've got everything from the financial through to the IT environment, and then through to even just the operational environment, being able to provide us with insight into the financials. So data allows us to integrate all these different aspects and even integrate how we operate as an organisation, which is something that I just love, because any way that we can join all these pieces of the puzzle together so that our auditors can form a better and a more insightful opinion, it's going to serve our clients a lot better. So, which is also that reference to insight. And then finally, one of those elements is automation, which, some people, when they see it or hear it, they kind of get a little bit scared. But for us, automation is this perfect opportunity to free up our skilled resources to be able to focus and leverage all that great university training, all that. They go to get their CPA, their CA. They can leverage those skills a lot better. So we use automation to really, both in the analytics space, and we're even exploring it as much as we can in the audit space, just so that we can probably stop the auditors, make them more efficient, less time on tasks that probably aren't leveraging their skills, and more time on the stuff that, to be honest, is actually more interesting for the auditor as well. Finally, also, so we take all that, but really a goal of our data strategy is to really improve how, the way we audit as well, right? And three aspects of that is really, we know if we can create a standardized view of all our clients. So while we appreciate all our clients are unique, we know that a lot of the information that we need to form opinions on can actually be pretty much standardized. And by creating a standard view with our data strategy, what we're able to do is design testing and also design an audit approach, which we have to design just once and we can apply to all. And it allows for a lot more consistency in how we audit. It also allows for a consistency in the type of opinions that we're forming. And, it just helps our auditors also transition from job to job, and also make sure that we deliver a very consistent service. And then also, which leads into our standardised approach. So what we do is we bring your data in to create a standardised review, and now then that turns into a standardised approach and how we audit, which can only benefit our clients as well, because it also means that we're much more efficient when we actually work with you as well. And then through to enhanced data. So a big part of what my team looks to achieve is to really identify ways that we can tie pieces of data out there that are able to exist within that client, tie it to the financial data to give it a lot more insight and a lot more accurate reflection of what that data represents, through to also just enhancing also the testing that we can do on that. Also that we can get this kind of better audit and better insight. Another aspect that is part of our data strategy is about providing this focused view for our client interactions. So what we want to do is I want auditors to be able to come to you with questions that are much more targeted and reflective of where they should really be spending their efforts, but also more importantly, ones that are actually going to be take a better use, a more efficient use of your limited time. Okay, so a lot of our strategy is about creating views or linking in analytics in a way that allows our auditors to come with better questions, and then also questions that are a lot more insightful, and then will also even potentially, as a side effect, add some value to you guys, so that you might even provide some insight that allows you to better understand your own organisation. So just about the evolution. So we've had analytics going for quite a little bit of time now, but what we've recently done is really look at evolving the design of our analytic backend. You'll see there's a new version of the app, so any local government entity that's already on our data strategy, they'll gradually see their auditors using a brand new version of the app. And a lot of this new design and new work has been really about how we can better integrate the data into our methodology, and then also new audit tool sets like Caseware, which is essentially where we record all our audit information. Part of the ways that data analytics delivers that is through a common language. So what we can do with data is we can tie together all these elements of the financial statement, the data that comes out of these financial systems, through to the general ledger, all the way through to our audit tool sets like Caseware, and just ensure that the auditor, when they're transitioning between all these elements, they're actually seeing the same data references, they're seeing the same data points, and it actually allows them just to share this common language, and makes for a much better, much happier auditor, as well as a much more efficient auditor. Another one which you guys won't necessarily see, it's this work paper integration. So now we've got this really new cool piece of audit software that our auditors are using to record all the audit evidence around their opinion. We're able to integrate our data directly, and this is what we're exploring a lot, is how we can integrate our data assets straight into these work papers, so that the auditors are actually just seeing now a lot more of those analytics delivered automatically, and they can spend more of their time just looking at it and making that assessment on what's being presented to them, and then coming to you with those kind of targeted questions. So it'll effectively provide a much more streamlined and efficient kind of audit, and also taking away some of the auditor having to think about analytics a little bit, and which is an area that shouldn't really be focusing. And then another one is that when they are using our tool sets, we've spent a lot of time making sure that those auditors are actually using those tool sets and those visuals appropriately. So we've actually built a lot of guidance into our new tool for each visual, what it tells you, what it doesn't tell you, how it links to the methodology. So what you can see here is that as a business, we know we're trying to improve how we audit. So this data and integration of analytics is very much focused now on really how we can integrate all these elements together and really guide that auditor a little bit more about how they can get the most out of what's being presented to them. Another aspect we are referenced in the previous slide was enhanced data. So this is where we go and we source other data sets, like from ASIC, which is really a data set that tells you who's associated with an entity, who the directors are, the secretaries are for any of these kind of vendor entities that we might be auditing. But we also need to know what those entities trade as, because what they're registered at ASIC is not necessarily what they're represented in your systems. So we use data like the Australian Business Register to actually add to that. Now, we've done that for a little while, so that's not new. And what we're doing now is, rather than an auditor coming to us and actually asking for us to run this type of analytics and actually stitch it all together for them, we actually just do it automatically. And it's all in the app. So when an auditor now, when they go to look at vendors, they can actually go to review, and it actually just shows all this information seamlessly stitched together. They don't see the little ABR and the ASIC reference. It's actually just all there in a nice, clean fashion, so that they can just focus their energies on what's really important, which is actually trying to look at those relationships and look at those data points and actually go, is that reasonable? And is that in line with my expectations as an auditor? Okay, so what we're really trying to do is, you can see here, in a way, our team is successful. If the auditor, it's so integrated that the auditor hardly even knows where that kind of data is coming from. They can actually just see it there in front of them, and that they're actually, they're actually just focused more importantly on the insight. Now, in saying that, behind all of this, and even in the tool set, the auditor can see where the data comes from, and there is that auditability and traceability, which is really important to us as well. But I suppose what we're trying to do, part of our evolution, is that seamless kind of nature. Also, that we can achieve this client experience triangle here, which is to really focus on delivering a better audit quality, where our staff had more time to actually audit and spend time on the important stuff. And also another feature which has come out during COVID, which is really knowing that we can't always access all our clients. A big part of our strategy is this concept of remote auditing, where effectively we can even lessen the burden on your respective council and your staff by trying to do as much of the audit as we can remotely, and also, more importantly, get those insightful questions that we can more target and then leverage that limited time that we might have with you. I mentioned data governance. Now, this is a big foundation of everything we do. So we're not just here to do cool stuff with data. We take your data very seriously, as in all of our clients. Now, what that means in practice is that you can see a whole list of all the principles and guidelines and the acts and standards that we adhere to. They're similar ones to the ones your own organisations will need to adhere to, but we're all part of the public sector, just like you guys in the local government. So we're here to make sure that we actually apply all of these principles, the same principles that you would be yourself in your own organisation. And that covers all those kind of areas there. Now, with security, there is, here's three areas that we do give a little bit of focus. Internally, it is this concept of least privilege. So it's really just saying who needs to access this data through its whole life cycle, from our ingestion through to when the auditor's actually seeing it. Another one is that, hey, we don't just review you guys, we open ourselves up to independent review. And this is really because we need to hold ourselves to the same standard that we hold you guys. So we very much do that through similar reviews, similar to everything you're kind of hearing today, similar principles, people trying to access our data inappropriately. We test all these things on a regular basis. We've got our own internal auditors. I get audited all the time, so I know how it feels personally, but it's great because I love it, because it's nothing better than to challenge myself and make sure that we are keeping on top of our game. On the actual data transfer and how we receive data as well, it's very important that when you send us this data, or one of your providers sends us this data, essentially that it's secure right from when we receive it. Okay, so we know we can secure it really well in our environment, but we've even got a secure file transfer process that goes through SciTech. It's been tested, it's been checked, and we just want to make sure that, yes, that data is always secure. Now, as a series of next steps, because I'm just conscious of time, what we would do here is that we are expanding, like I said before, we are expanding our data strategy. So we're really keen to come out, and I'm always happy to come out and have a chat with any of your staff, with our audit team, if you want to understand a little bit more about how we do it, or even some of your technical staff, or how we secure and those data governance principles that we apply. But one aspect too is we also, even though we've got a mandate, we've got this ability to source your data, and we have been sourcing it for a while, we really want to be clear on and make sure that your data owners across the data that we're receiving and how we're receiving it and why we're receiving it. So that's why we have an approval process with an email that's just there. We would customize that for each entity and we'd provide that to you. Another one is to interface with your own IT providers, because I know that they can vary from entity to entity. So we will come out and we will actually, remotely on video conference, we will actually have a chat with your IT providers and make sure that they're clear and really identify that most efficient and effective way to transfer us the data and be as specific as possible on what that data looks like. And then finally, we don't want to be a black box. So what we also look to do is provide you access to the FA app that we've built. Now, we do that on a temporary basis. My primary audience is the auditor, but we don't want to be a black box. We want to show you what we've done with your data. This is also a little bit so that you can also maybe see what can be done with your data. But we're very happy to also, just provide you that access on a limited basis to some targeted staff there, where we expect to be a named user with multi-factor authentication and all those things that David's really been referring to in his own cybersecurity review, because we want to protect that data at the same time. And then finally, what we've even got a sheet that even runs through a lot of what I talked about, which we can provide out to any audit team. This would be in addition to anything we would talk to if we talk to you individually, but it really does cover off a lot of the major aspects of what I've discussed today, and also what I would cover off in those other presentations that are more targeted. So that's pretty much all I was going to cover off. So what we'll do is we're going to see if there's any new questions, because we're almost at time. Here's a question from Michael. Has COVID-19 impacted on the future QAO strategic audit plan timetable?
So it certainly has, and rightly so. We tabled our strategic audit plan, which is our 3-year plan for the performance audit topics that we were going to do over the next 3 years. We tabled that in December 2019 and signposted what we were going to do in 2021, 22 and 23. So between December 19 when we issued that and kind of June this year, a lot has changed. And so it's natural that we recalibrate what we said we were going to do and understand how many of those things are still important at this point in time. They're still important topics, but what is the right things for us to do at this point in time? And obviously there's a whole series of things around COVID and response measures and things that might be, we need to understand whether they are a greater priority than some of the things we had on that list. So we're going through that process at the moment. hopefully we'll firm that up in the next couple of weeks. We'll then advise the Parliamentary Committee and our clients around what we're going to actually complete in the 2021 financial year. We'll then put out a 3-year plan early in the next year for the future 3 years. Given where the world is at the moment, we will not list every single thing that we could possibly do. We're actually going to list what we're definitely going to do and leave some flexibility there, because I don't think any one of us knows what's going to happen in the next 3 months or 6 months or whatever. So we will leave some flexibility in our plan to respond to the world as it changes over the next 12 months. So.
Yeah, cool. Just another one from Dole. Is QAO planning to visit council to meet with mayor and councillors after COVID-19 situation gets better?
Absolutely. And sort of Damon and the Auditor General had some trips planned, earmarked, roadmap sort of planned out, and obviously that's on a little bit of hold at the moment, and we're just trying to work out when that's possible for us to be able to do that. So, but we certainly plan to.
Awesome. I'll just put it on this one. From Michael, are there reforms to the reporting to Parliament on local government audit results, i.e. traffic lights still to occur?
So we are reforming that process. We're going through a series of things. I think we signposted last year, we were looking at maturity models and different things around financial reporting. Obviously this year is a different year. We need to work out what is appropriate to report to Parliament this year, because I don't think holding people to all of the same things we have done in the past is necessarily the right way to go. So we're working through that. We will be fair and we will talk to everyone around what we intend to put in our reports to Parliament at the end of the year. Damon, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that one.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, Patrick, for councils that have had, serious impacts as a consequence of COVID, I mean, obviously we want to understand what those impacts are. But I guess for the 1920 year, the traffic light sort of reporting would continue. But as you said, Pat, we'd want to understand particular councils' impediments this year. And apply our practical lens to that as well. So,
and I don't know if anyone's been in this circumstance, but we've certainly, where we had to for pro forma statements and different things like that, we were certainly happy to renegotiate deadlines, because I think we want to work with everyone to make sure things work. So if those things haven't happened, let us know. If that was a problem, we want to work through some of those things. If there's some outliers there but from what we're hearing, hopefully everything has been, worked through together in partnership. So
I'm just conscious of time. It's 11 o'clock. Now we have another great question from Michael around invoicing. What we'll do is we'll take that one on notice, because I think Tony wanted to have a closeout with some words before we go. But Michael, we'll definitely cover off that invoicing one. That's one that we'll consult with our IS auditors as well and just make sure we have a rounded response to them. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Pat and David, Damon and Robert for the session today. I think it was really interesting. Hopefully it went really well. Thank you everybody for participating. On the close, you will get a little link to a very short survey. As this is our first one, we obviously want to find out if there's any feedback that we can do for our next one, which we're aiming at this stage will be around mid-September. We've got a few different options that we're currently exploring with what it will be about, but we're definitely looking to pull another one in around about the 18th or thereabouts of September, but we'll obviously be letting people know. So we'll follow up with the questions there, and also the recording will be posted up, a link on our website or a YouTube channel or some method, so that if you do want to sort of watch it, or if you've got other team members that couldn't make it, or there's particular things you want to go back over, you'll be able to do that. So thank you everybody for joining us today. We hope you've got some good information out of it, and we look forward to seeing you, or you seeing us in another month's time. Thank you.